This is lesson 42, and we'll be discussing tempo markings.
Returning to J. Albrecht's Ready to Read Music, we're in Unit 4, which is our unit on more musical symbols and terms. This is Lesson 3, How Fast, How Slow. You have learned that musical notes can be high or low, long or short, and loud or soft. You also need to know how fast or how slow the music should be played or sung. This is called the tempo of the music. Often a word or two at the beginning of a piece of music will tell you how fast it should be played. But sometimes tempo markings, like dynamic markings, are shown with Italian words. Here are some common tempo markings. So we have largo, which means very slow. We have adagio, which means slow. Andante, which means a moderate speed. It's often called a walking tempo. Then we have moderato, which means moderately, but it's faster than andante. Then we have allegro, which is fast. Vivace, which is very fast. And then presto, which is very fast, faster than vivace. There are musical terms and abbreviations for changes in tempo too. I'm just going to jump in here and say that I would prefer to use the word modifications in tempo 2, and I'll explain that a little more as we move throughout the lesson. But let's just call it a modification in tempo. We have a ritardando. He says it's retardando. There's different ways of pronouncing these words, but typically we say ritardando or retardando, and for short, rit. This means gradually getting slower. And that gradually part is important. It doesn't mean hit a brick wall and take a much slower speed. It means gradually unwind the tempo, unwind the momentum. Rallentando, or RAL, is the abbreviation that you'll often see, means gradually slower, so it's the same meaning as ritardando, and again, note the gradually. It's important. Then we have an accelerando, or the abbreviation that you'll often see written in music. This means, again, note the gradually, faster, just as it sounds, we're accelerating. And again, we're not suddenly choosing a faster speed. We are accelerating. We are starting to hit the gas pedal and move forward to a faster tempo. Then we have something called a tempo, and a tempo means to return to the previous tempo. And actually, I would even say the original tempo. Tempo markings are usually placed above the staff, and changes, or let's call modifications in tempo, are usually placed below the staff. Let's really emphasize the usually, because that's not always true. For example, a tempo is always placed above the staff. These three, ritardando or rit, rallentando or ral, and accelerando or accel, are usually below the staff, along with the dynamic markings that we've already learned about. All right, so let's just look at this score. You'll see we have adagio here. So we know we should be playing this piece slowly. And then we note here that we have an accelerando. So that means that the tempo will just push forward. We'll speed up just a little bit. Then we see a rit. So then we know the tempo is going to slow back down gradually. So we're going to gradually back up the tempo a little bit. So just as an example of what something like this might sound like, we're starting on this A down here, and we might choose this speed because it's adagio, which means slow. Then we see an accelerando here, and we start moving it forward, and a rit. I'm going to do that one more time, and this time I'm going to count while I'm doing it, just to kind of show you how I'm thinking of the pulse in my head. 1, ready, play. 1, 2, 3, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I just want to take a short break here to go to a piece of classical music to exemplify why I prefer we call rit and rallentando and accelerando modifications to the tempo, or even modifications to the tempo we're currently in, is because both rallentando and accelerando, they're talking about pushing the tempo slightly forward and pulling the tempo slightly back. But it's not actually a change in tempo. And the reason I'm being specific about that is a change in tempo also occurs, and those are actually usually marked above the staff. So for example, in this sonata, Brahms has indicated that we should be starting at andante, which is a walking tempo. He also gives us an additional marking, tranquillo, which means tranquilly. And then we play several measures at that tempo, at that walking tempo, and then we have a sudden jump to vivace. So it is suddenly very fast. That's what I would call an actual tempo change. Whereas rit and rall and accelerando, those are modifications to whatever tempo you're currently in, and the base tempo is staying the same. So a rit or an accelerando that is within an andante tempo will be, very different than a rit or an accelerando in a general vivace tempo. I hope that makes sense. Here's a chart of tempos from slowest to fastest. So our slowest tempo will be our largo, which means very slow, adagio, which just means slow, andante, a walking tempo, moderato, a moderate tempo, allegro, fast, vivace, very fast, presto, very fast, and faster than vivace. Which tempo marking is faster? Circle the correct answer. Well, we know largo means very slow, and we know presto means very fast, so we're going to go with this one. Vivace or adagio. Again, vivace means very fast. Not as fast as presto, but very fast. Adagio means slow, so vivace will be our faster tempo. Which tempo marking is slower? Circle the correct answer. Well, presto means very fast and faster than vivace. Andante is a walking tempo, so that's going to be slower. Moderato means a moderate tempo, and vivace again means very fast. So we're going to be choosing moderato as our slower tempo. What does each tempo marking mean? Write the correct letter from the second column in the blank space. So allegro means fast. So we're going to put our A here. Vivace means very fast. So we need our E. Andante is a walking tempo. So we need our C. Largo is very slow. So we need our B. Moderato is a moderate speed, so we need a D. Adagio is slow, so our F will go here. What does each of these tempo changes mean? Write the correct letter from the second column in the blank space. So ritardando, again, means gradually getting slower, so we need our A right here. Accelerando means gradually getting faster, so we need our B right here. Again, emphasis on the gradually. And then a tempo means to return to the previous tempo or the original tempo, so we need our C right here. We also very frequently, especially in church music, will just see something like this at the top of the music. Quarter note equals 80. And what this means is that if you set your metronome to 80, each pulse will represent a quarter note beat. You may also see something like eighth note equals 100. Every beat you hear represents 1/8 note pulse. Sometimes you'll have these types of metronome markings in addition to something like relaxed feel. So very often in modern church music, we'll have a metronome marking, and then we might also see a few English words describing the basic mood or feeling of the song. The Italian words are more frequently seen in classical music, although these modifications of the tempo changes are frequently used in sacred music as well. So ritardando, accelerando, a tempo, we'll see these very frequently in our church music, and their abbreviations. So the ones to get most familiar with would be roll and rit, which both mean gradually getting slower, accelerando, which means gradually getting faster, and a tempo, which means return to the original tempo.